So can anyone be an artist? I mean, is it something you're born with, or is it something you can learn, like, playing the piano?
That's a good question. I think there's a bit of both, right? Some people seem to have a natural inclination, a kind of innate visual sense or something. But I also think, with enough practice and dedication, anyone can develop skills and create art. It's just, the level of skill might differ.
Yeah, I guess so. It's kind of like anyone can learn to play a simple tune on the piano, but it takes a lot of practice and talent to become a concert pianist. So maybe it's more about the level of skill and expression, rather than whether you're born an artist or not.
Exactly. And what even defines art, right? I mean, it's changed so much over time. What was considered radical art 100 years ago is now, totally mainstream. So maybe the definition of artist changes too, depending on what we consider art at any given point.
Totally. And, well, maybe the key isn't about whether someone times an artist, but whether they have the desire to create and express themselves through a chosen medium. Whether that's painting, sculpture, music, writing, the act of creation itself seems crucial.
That's true. It's also subjective. I mean, some people think a splash of paint is art. Others need a highly skilled narrative to engage with, right? It's all in the eye of the beholder, really.
Yeah, I think so. It's about the drive to create and share something with the world, the passion behind it. And maybe that passion is what truly makes an artist, regardless of their technical skill.
So it's more about the intention and the effort rather than some inherent talent? That's pretty interesting. That makes it more democratic, Like anyone with the will can participate in the creation and experience of art.
So I was at this gallery opening last night, and it got me thinking, is art ever truly good or bad? I mean, is there some objective standard, or is it all just, opinion?
Ooh, tricky one. I guess it depends what you mean by good or bad. Like, technically proficient? Or emotionally resonant? Or does it even matter in the end?
Right, technically I've seen some stuff that's just astonishingly well executed, but leaves me completely cold. Whereas some stuff that's, aesthetically questionable somehow just works.
Exactly. I think there's a real difference between skillful execution and actual artistic merit, Skill is one thing, but moving someone, making them think asterisk, that's another thing entirely.
I think there's a whole layer of cultural context too, isn't there? What one generation considers groundbreaking, the next might find completely passé, or even offensive, in a way that wasn't even imaginable at the time.
Totally. And sometimes, the bad art, the stuff that's deliberately provocative or shocking, ends up sparking the most interesting conversations, even if it's not necessarily pleasant to look at. It forces you to confront your preconceptions, right?
And some of that bonkers stuff is now hanging in prestigious museums. So maybe good and bad are just labels that change with time, and what's considered important or meaningful is completely subjective in the end.
Yeah, like that whole Dadaist movement. Now looking back, its influence is undeniable. At the time though, must have seemed bonkers, absolutely bonkers, utter chaos.
I think you're right, and maybe that's the real goodness of art. Its ability to trigger a response, any response, whether it's admiration, disgust, confusion, or even just a shrug. It gets the brain working, and that's got to count for something.
Perhaps it's more about the impact then? How the art makes you feel, what it makes you think about. It's a conversation starter, really, even if that conversation ends in a loud argument.
So I was at the museum the other day, the one with all the impressionist stuff? And it really got me thinking, but can we actually learn anything times new times from art? I mean, beyond the historical context and the brushstrokes and stuff?
That's a great question. I mean, we learn about history, different cultures, certainly. But new things? I suppose it depends on what you mean by new. New facts? New techniques? New ways of seeing the world, maybe?
Exactly. New ways of seeing. I mean, take Monet's water lilies, for instance. It's not like he's teaching you botany, right? But you look at those paintings, and suddenly you see water in a completely different way. It's almost like a new kind of perception is being unlocked.
I get what you mean. It's like you're not learning a specific fact, but it's expanding your understanding, I guess? Like you can't really explain what makes them so moving, but they just, affect you. There's an emotional intelligence at play that's hard to quantify.
Right. And that's the new part, I think. It's not about adding facts to a database. It's about expanding your emotional vocabulary, your capacity for empathy, your imagination, I guess. It's like learning a new language, but for the soul or something.
That's beautifully put. It's a way of accessing different parts of the brain, right? The logical, analytical part is certainly involved when we examine the techniques. But the emotional impact, that's something else entirely. A different kind of knowledge. Less tangible, but maybe even more profound.
Totally. And it's a completely different way of learning, too. You're not passively absorbing information. You're actively engaging with it, interpreting it, feeling it. It's a participatory kind of learning, not just a receptive one.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. It's about cultivating a different way of thinking, a different way of being. And that, my friend, is a pretty profound kind of learning.
So maybe the new isn't so much about acquiring new information, but about recalibrating our existing understanding, expanding our perspectives, deepening our emotional response. It's less about what we learn and more about how we learn, and even who we become through the process. So imagine 100 years from now, right? How do you think people will be making art then? I mean, we've already got AI generating stuff, NFTs. It's all a bit wild, isn't it?
It's crazy. I think a lot of it will be hyper-personalized. Like, you'll have AI assistants that help you create art based on your unique brainwaves or something. Total mind meld art, you know?
That's intense. Or maybe super boring, depending on the algorithm, haha. But maybe there'll be a backlash against all that tech. A return to really traditional, handmade stuff. Almost like a craft revival, but on steroids.
Yeah, that's possible. A kind of artisanal AI rejection. People might seek out the imperfections, the human touch. You know, like there's already a whole market for that kind of vintage stuff now, even though it's not that old. Imagine the appreciation for truly handmade things in 100 years.
True. And what about the materials? Will we still be using canvas and paint? Or something totally bioengineered and weird? Glow-in-the-dark bioluminescent moss sculptures? That'd be something.
Ooh, I like that. Or maybe art made from recycled space junk? Think of the texture. The stories embedded in the metal. You'd have a whole new genre of space-age salvage art.
That's getting a little Black Mirror for me. But you are right. It could be something we can't even imagine now. Like how people in 1923 couldn't possibly imagine the internet. It's all a bit mind-boggling, huh?
I could totally see that. And maybe the very idea of art will change. It might not even be visual. It could be some sort of interactive sensory experience. Or maybe even something you can only access through a specific type of brain implant. Whoa.
Perhaps. A seamless integration of creativity and existence. Or maybe it will all just be a bunch of goofy cat memes, who knows?
Totally. It's like, will we even need to asterisk call times at art anymore? Or will art become so ingrained in everything we do that it's just...
So light and shadow, right? It's funny how something as simple as the absence of light can be so powerful, you know? I mean, think about chiaroscuro. It's not just about the contrast, it's about the drama, the emotion it creates.
Absolutely. It's like a whole narrative unfolds just from how the light falls. A single shaft of light cutting through a dark room can completely change the mood, the story. It's amazing what you can imply without even explicitly showing things, just by controlling the light in dark areas.
Exactly. And it's so versatile. Rembrandt used it to create these incredibly intense portraits, full of depth and emotion. Caravaggio, on the other hand, used it to create this really stark, dramatic kind of effect, almost theatrical, right? Completely different styles, yet both masters of light and shadow.
Totally. It's also about the texture, isn't it? How light can enhance or diminish texture depending on how you work it. A rough surface might appear smoother in soft light, or intensely rough under harsh, direct lighting. It's all about that play between what is and what the viewer perceives.
Yes. And think about color, too. Shadow isn't just the absence of color, it's a color in itself, or at least, it has a color quality. It can be cool, warm. It can completely change the feel of an entire piece.
It's like a hidden language, isn't it? A language spoken through light and shadow, almost subliminally influencing how a piece of art is experienced. It's not something you can really put your finger on, but you feel it deeply.
Precisely. Like, you know how sometimes a painting will just grab you? It's not always about the subject matter, it can just be how the light and shadow are used, for sure. There is an almost magical power in that controlled manipulation. So I was looking at this amazing painting the other day, and it just got me thinking, how do painters even know where to put the paint? I mean, it's not like there's a recipe, right?
Right? It's wild. I think it's a combination of things, you know? Like technical skill, obviously. Understanding color theory, composition, kind of stuff. But there's also something more intuitive, I guess?
Totally. It's like some sort of visual language almost. They're communicating something, an emotion, a feeling, without even using words, you know? It's fascinating.
And the crazy thing is, two painters could look at the same thing, say, a sunset, and paint it completely differently. And both paintings could be stunning in their own way. It's so subjective.
Exactly. It's all about the artist's vision, their interpretation. It reminds me of that quote, what was it? Something about art being the expression of the artist's soul or something like that. A bit cheesy, I know, but it has a point.
Oh, I think it's more than just cheesy. I mean, there's something deeply personal about a piece of art that connects with the artist's life and experience. Their whole being practically bleeds into the canvas.
It's like, a secret conversation between the artist and the viewer, right? A language only they understand. You know, I've always wondered about the process itself. Do they plan everything out meticulously beforehand, or is it more spontaneous?
Yeah, and sometimes, I think, the placement of the paint, that seemingly arbitrary decision of where to put a certain shade, that tiny detail, it's almost magical how it can completely shift the whole feeling of the artwork. It's like a hidden code.
I love that idea, a dance with the paint. It almost sounds a bit spiritual, doesn't it? Like there's something almost mystical about the connection between the artist and their creation. It's such a mysterious process.
Probably a bit of both, I'd guess. Some artists are incredibly precise, sketching and planning every single detail. Others, it's more like a dance, I imagine, letting the paint guide them. A sort of improvisation, almost.
It really is, and that mystery, that ambiguity, that's part of what makes it so compelling, I think. It's why we keep coming back to it, keep trying to decipher it. There's always something new to see.
Yeah, dog. Piggly Wiggly.